Alright, hi everyone. Please excuse my whiskers, I just had a shower. So it's a bit untamed. So, so I just wanted to take the opportunity to run through some um, of my own experience, my understanding, feelings, emotions, and thoughts around um, what I like to consider, because I'm now doing direct work with some of you, because I'm now doing one to ones. Um, just to kind of describe where I am with this, in my own experience, and just try and be as open and uh, honest as possible. Because, like I said in a previous video, there are considerations going into this that as an idea don't really seem um, like a thing. But in practice, I'm very aware um, how that this is an opportunity for greater clarity for myself. This is an opportunity to address um, aspects of conditioning that are still present here, um, and I just like to remain transparent and attentive to this throughout as I'm doing this, because you know there is an inheriting of responsibility with this, working directly with people. It could be easy to use the absolute view to opt out of responsibility. Um, say that ultimately I am not responsible. This just is what it is, but that's not entirely true, and in fact, I think that's quite unskillful. Because if that side is true, then the opposite's also going to have to be true. There is a responsibility here that I'm inheriting with this, that I need to consider, um, and kind of inquire into ongoing, in order to be effective, in order to be as skillful as possible, and offer that as a service. Because if there's any lean towards there being a one here, if the focus moves away from the connection, the pointing, so to speak, the whoever I'm working with, and something here gets in the road, that's I lose some of my skill. The interaction loses some of its clarity. When we're potentially introducing something where there is a potential for fortification of an ego structure. The potential is there. I need to be attentive to that. I need to watch. When we're introducing money into things, of course, everyone knows the complications that go along with that. So again, for myself, I just need to watch. I need to remain attentive and keep inquiring into, based on my responsibility, is this skillful? Is this effective? You know, are there any ways in which I'm losing skillfulness? Is there anything about me, the remnants of this ego structure, that are limiting something about this? Absorbing some of the attention, some of the focus. So I'm very aware of the potential for this context that can exist. And that context is that David is someone who knows what he's talking about in regards to this thing called awakening. And as I always say, that's not ultimately true. That's not what this is. And I say as well that, you know, what I want to hold important in this, what I want to be clear in this, is that this isn't this is not fully true, but this isn't primarily the passing on of knowledge, a teaching, where, you know, I have something of value that I'm teaching to you or giving to you, but that's not totally true, right? Because I can teach skills, you know, I can guide in a skillful way the inquiry, I can teach meditation. So at one level, you know, that is what's happening, but I want to be clear that at the ultimate level, that's not what this is. That's not what this is going to be. I feel that this is most effective when there is a thinning or a disappearance of those boundaries between me and you. And part of that, those boundaries are kind of like a fixation on David having a message, or David being some kind of authority on a thing called awakening, or the holder of a knowledge that is awakening. You know, that there is a relationship there. There is a, you know, an exchange of knowledge, an exchange of concept there, but that's not what's important about it, I don't think. What's important is the felt sense of intimacy with what this is. In the absence of those boundaries and those limitations. And in that, there isn't a hierarchy of knowledge or attainment. You know, there isn't a contrast between clear and unclear, awake and identified. You know, that's not what's important about this. What's important is that all of that is merely a construct. That anything that you get from this, you're giving to yourself. It's not a transactional thing. It's not me giving clarity to you. You know, there is a guidance, there is a teaching there on the relative level. which is just part of this, but that's not the whole thing. That's not what I'd like to focus on, and I'm very aware of that context being reinforced and reified, which it will happen to some degree. But I believe that I'll lose some skillfulness if I allow that context to become too real. To become too real. I'll give some of my own experience recently with this. So I did a Zoom call the other day with a really cool group of people who invited me on, and you know, what I noticed there was, and you know, this is just my experience, and what I noticed there was that there is a potentiality there for this context of there being an identity here that knows something, that owns this message, that owns something of value, that is imparting that. You know, something here of high value, something here that knows something that other people don't, which is ridiculous in regards to this. And the way that appeared for me was, you know, there was a movement of feeling that was kind of like the potential to manifest this context in this experience. And it moved a couple times, it just moved like a feeling, and I recognize that feeling, a transient feeling that comes and goes. I recognize the signature of self. It's like it's still here. It still moves. Yeah. And usually that would have been used to build a narrative around this. Thoughts would have been informed by that feeling into this kind of feedback loop, creating a context around it. The thoughts didn't form, but the feeling still moved, and it came back a couple of times. You know, if the thoughts moved, this is what it would have looked like, because I know the function so well. It would have been like thoughts about like an imposter syndrome, which those thoughts and feelings would have informed a context around it, and that context would look like I have to portray a certain image as a representation of this self, this character, so that maybe I feel valuable, I feel important, I don't feel like threatened or out of my depth. I feel like I know what I'm talking about. Barrier, big defense. You know, that doesn't form anymore. You know, the feeling that would have been informed by certainly moved, and as it was recognized, as the inquiry inquires into itself, it dissipated. But that whole barrier, that context that would have formed, would have removed my ability to be skillful. Would have, the focus would then be on this thing here, and that's not what's happening. That's not, you know, the point. That's just not the point. A preoccupation with the maintenance of an identity in the center. So noticing that move just kind of made me more inclined to be attentive to the potentiality of this identity structure to potentially influence in its remnants, albeit potentially influence my ability to be skillful and be of service, because this is never done. You have to inquire ongoing, and be attentive to the potential of that to return always. There is a finality in the no self-realization to the reality of that, the felt real experience. Like, that's clearly, there's an awareness here that that's not what I am. That's obvious. There's a finality to that, but the remnants of that structure continue on in experience. And this context that we're entering now certainly has the potential to bring about the remnants of that identity structure into experience, which I don't want to have inform any of this because then it will be informed by something false, something not real. So this is partially why I've been kind of hesitant about doing this, although the want for it has been there. I'm aware of this context, and I'm aware of the movements of self and how it operates, and under which circumstances there is the potential there for it to move in experience, for the conditioning that was informed by such a long time of living as a real experience of that to still be moving in experience some way. So with this, like I said, there is a responsibility now here that I need to be attentive to what's happening with myself. Because there's more to consider about this than you would think. But you know what? It's a perfect opportunity for greater clarity. So this is what's incredible about it. Ultimately it's not problematic. Ultimately I'm benefiting from this, because you're like put in the position where it's like a test of realization. It's a test of what's realized. Because it's what's realized is everything. Sooner or later is going to be applied to everything. And going back a while, there'd been no chance that I would have even been capable of doing something like this. Self would have got on the road too much. But it's incredible that that's not a limitation now. There's something moving this deeper than me and you. There's something more beautiful going on here. Such that the me and you is just an idea. We're going to transcend those limitations completely. That's the point of this. And there is a relative aspect to that, and there is an absolute aspect to that. It's like a fine balance. It's the same thing, but there's a fine balance, and then we kind of walk this line between that. And it's like, does it deviate one way or another? Is it level? Is it balanced? It's level, it's balanced, it's skillful, and it can be felt. So that makes some sense. Also, in the line of work that I'm in, I occupy a position where I'm a manager. I manage people also I teach fitness classes. I work in a gym. So the habit that is gained from occupying that position is that I can sound like I know what I'm talking about because people are in a position where they're listening to me to give them guidance, essentially a teacher. This kind of has equipped me with a way of relating in a habitual sense where it feels like I know what I'm talking about. It seems like I am an authority because in that situation I am. Again, I want to be aware of that because, again, that reinforces this context, which I deeply feel is not actually what's going on here, what's happening here, not what this is. So I guess this is just to kind of open up a bit and describe what I feel like my limitations could be in this, in opening up to doing one-to-ones and essentially taking on a role of someone who is an instrument of guiding this, is an instrument in the relative of thinning and, you know, transcending these boundaries of limitation. It's a very strange thing, right? It is very weird. It's again going into this spontaneously, partially whimsically as part of it, but there also has to be a relative consideration here. There has to be it has to be done properly. You know, there is a responsibility here that I'm taking on with this, and I just suppose I'd like to make it clear that I know that, and that's part of my ongoing inquiry in this. Also, I've heard that I suppose the Zoom call I described to you there was, which was great, but it was a kind of insight into this, I suppose. You know, like there can be, when I'm interacting with you all directly, right? I'll be sharing your experience. You'll be sharing my experience. The experience becomes one, and what we're bringing to the surface and going through there, directly in real time, is potentially going to be a lot of intense emotion, sensation, suffering. And in thinning those limits, it becomes no longer just your suffering. You know, the experiences merge in a sense, and there's a shared resonance. This might sound wacky to some people. There is a shared resonance that can be felt. That has a physiological, energetic effect. You know, so say for example, I'm not comparing it to counselling, but say for example, just a similar thing. I did a course to learn how to become a counsellor, and you part of that was people in these professional positions will continually engage in counselling themselves will take skillful measures to maintain boundaries such that that shared experience of emotion doesn't bleed through those boundaries into and affect the counsellor in the rest of their life. That it doesn't have so much of a pronounced emotional energetic effect. That's pretty much talking about the same thing, acknowledging that there is a resonance happening there. There is a sharing of the emotions, a sharing of experience, a blurring of those boundaries, and that is recognised to have a physiological effect because it's a sensation, it's very visceral, it's very physical. So I also want to be attentive to this as well. And I'm not it could be totally fine. I'm just not sure what the effects of that are going to be, because I'm going to feel it all, and I'm directly, so to speak, exposing myself, this mind body, to those energetics, to the emotions in that way. I've heard other people who do one-to-one say that that can affect you. You need to kind of figure that out. Because again, that can interfere with the skill. See, if I feel an emotion, if we feel an emotion, and there's a resistance in me to that, if I don't like that, of course, again, that's going to affect the skill. Because I'm taking a position on it. I don't like the emotion that you're feeling, which is kind of madness, really, but it's possible. It's possible. So the point is that I just don't know yet. This is something that I'm going to have to figure out as we go. But I just thought it would be nice to open up about that and just kind of share what my considerations are in going into this, just to be transparent about it. But you can let me know your thoughts. Anyway, that'll do for now, and I'll talk to you next time.